I've become more powerful than any Jedi. Even you.
Much to learn, you still have.
Stellaris patch 3.6 has finally moved from the beta to the live version. In this video, we're going to cover every single change that has been included in patch 3.6. Because some of those changes you may have already heard about, I will break this video down into chapters so that if you already know lots about the combat rebalance, for example, and you don't want to hear about it again, you can skip forwards, so look out for that below. But all in all, I believe these changes, whilst not being the biggest changes to the economic system that we've ever seen, are probably some of the biggest gameplay changes we've had since we went from patch 2.9 to 3.0 with the full pop rework. And overall, this is an exciting time for Stellaris. We now have to relearn everything we used to know about fleet combat and how all of that worked. Don't worry, I will be bringing you more details on the combat rebalance and where the new meta is going in the future. But for today, let's start off right at the beginning and go through a quick fire summary of what the main changes are. So we are getting new galaxy shapes. You can explore the final frontier with now 3 or 6 armed spiral galaxies, barred galaxies, starbursts, cartwheels, and spoked galaxies. These shapes all sound a little funky. Basically, we've got some interesting additions here where we've got the map reworked such that we could have galaxies with only a single hyperlane connecting one half of the galaxy to another, possibly two. Some galaxies where we've got big blocks of stars which are not very connected to the other blocks, and that sort of thing. We of course have the fleet combat rebalance. Combat computers have been updated to more reliably alter behavior of ships in combat. Most weapons have now been rebalanced and changed. We now have minimum range added into our large weapons and new ship roles for the ship designer to make things a little bit easier with ship creation, and there's even more. The ascension paths have been reworked. This of course requires the Utopia DLC, but instead of having ascension paths being made up of 2 ascension perks, you now take the primary starting ascension perk and that unlocks a tradition tree. They've split the synthetic ascension into 2 ascensions, cybernetic and a separate synthetic ascension path, and they've added many new bonuses and abilities to those existing paths. Taking the synthetic path as a machine empire requires the Synthetic Dawn story pack, but does not require Utopia, an important little note to know. The Covenants have been reworked, so if you ever breach into the Shroud, if you go full psionic, we now have Covenants that have been reworked with a semi-randomly selected Shroud entity. You are guaranteed to get a Covenant forming when you complete your psionic ascension. Should you refuse, you can also pay to approach your Shroud entity of choice, though they may not be happy to see you. They've added a whopping new Federation type, the Holy Covenant Federation, basically a spiritualist federation, a good counter in some ways to the materialist federation we've been seeing. So it is written, spread the good word throughout the galaxy with the Holy Covenant Federation type. There are new orbital ring buildings. This of course requires Overlord. You can now build planetary unique buildings on orbital rings, saving you valuable building slots. And they've added text-to-speech for long text, new story events, a new relic, more first contact events, UI, modding improvements, and a plethora of bug fixes and other improvements. Alright, that is the summary of the changes. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty so you can find out exactly what is going on in patch 3.6. But before we do that, if you're enjoying this video, please note that in the changelog by using the like button. The changelog here starts with the first and probably largest change that we're going to see with 3.6, and that is the full combat rebalance and rework. What are the changes and additions? Well, the Stellaris 3.6 Orion update includes many changes to combat. More counters should exist for different strategies, and mixed fleets should now be more viable than before, covering for the weaknesses of other ship types. So we now have new ship roles. These can be selected to auto-design ships that actually fulfill certain roles, such as artillery, brawler, torpedo, and so on. These roles aren't always unique to a specific hull type, so you can have artillery ships for corvettes, you can have them for destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, of course. If you do not possess any weapons that fulfill the selected role, the auto designer will do its best with what you have. They've added a new ship type, frigates, which are a more advanced form of corvette specialized in delivering G, that is torpedo class weapons. And that's something important to note here, is that the old missile slots, the G slots, those are now torpedo specific slots. They're gone from corvettes entirely, and so they only appear on these frigate classes and also on the cruisers. Now, torpedoes gain a multiplicative damage bonus to their damage based on the ship size of the target, as do Praetorian missiles. The Unbidden also get a reduced variant of this as well. This bonus is capped at plus 800% damage. So the way this works, if you fire at a ship of hull size 1, your torpedoes will hit with plus 100% damage. Hull size 2 plus 200% damage, 4 plus 400% damage, and 8 plus 800% damage. It's capped out there, so Titans, Leviathans, that sort of thing, even the largest size of starbase, because different starbases get different multiplicative damage types based on the size of the actual starbase, will be capped out at this plus 800%. Note that this is additive as well, so the maximum here is 100% damage plus 800% for a total of 900% damage, or 9 times the damage. Torpedoes now have a maximum firing arc of 25 degrees and a shorter maximum range. They have a very short range, in fact, you have to get in very close before you can start firing those torpedoes. Interestingly though, the torpedoes now have a shorter maximum range than the minimum range of most artillery. So if you only have torpedoes equipped on a ship, you can be inside of an enemy vessel's artillery minimum range and be able to fire, but they will be unable to fire at you. Energy torpedoes such as proton and neutron launchers have been changed into G-class weapons with a minimum range. Damage has been adjusted to be balanced as a torpedo-class weapon, and like the new torpedoes, they deal increased damage to larger targets. Unlike standard torpedoes, they remain instant hit weapons for now. And I believe that for now deserves an underlining, because I believe the devs intend on nerfing proton and neutron launchers even further and preventing them from being instant hit. You see, proton and neutron launchers were the best weapons in the game that could go in L slots before this rework. Now they still are good and have some effective uses, but they generally are outstripped by kinetic artillery that don't have this multiplicative problem. They've also had their range reduced from 130 to 120, making them no longer the longest range weapon outside of Titan lances and X-slot weaponry. Some sources of evasion have now been replaced with other effects. Notably, the psionic admirals, they've had their evasion bonuses taken away, meaning psionic destroyers find it quite difficult to get up to max evasion now. Small weapons of a category now have a slightly faster refire rate. Large weapons of a category now have a slightly slower refire rate, meaning larger weapons shoot less frequently but do deal more damage as ever. They've added a minimum range to all large weapons except for lasers and autocannons. Autocannons don't really get much in the way of a range increase as you increase them in size, so that makes sense. Also important to note here that autocannons have been rebalanced to the point where they absolutely slap, unless you come up against armor, in which case, oh goodness me, you don't want to be running them. Weapon component tooltips now display minimum range and firing arc. Significant adjustments have been made to various ship combat behaviors. I assume what that is talking about now is the fact that most ship combat behavior will be to stay at the maximum range of their longest range weapon, which can both be fantastic but also a problem for certain ship types. Whereas before, the ships used to fly in until all of their weapons were in range, that didn't make much sense for an artillery or a carrier type ship, which really should be sitting at the back as a weapons platform. So I do like this change from a thematic perspective. How it balances out in the game is a bit interesting, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Ship combat computers now ignore certain weapons for desired range purposes. As I've mentioned, they base their desired range on the actual loadout of the ship. Swarm and torpedo behavior will charge in, picket and line behaviors will attempt to stay at the range of their median range weapons, and artillery and carriers will now try to stay at the range of their longest range weapons. This generally increases the desire for ships to remain at range if possible. Artillery and carrier combat computers now use the new maintain range combat behavior, which then means they attempt to back off if at less than roughly half of their desired range. Strikecraft no longer intercept missiles, which is a massive nerf to Strikecraft, I have to say that, but will continue to fight each other. The health and refresh rate of most strikecraft have also been reduced. Flak batteries now more strongly counter strikecraft, with point defense now more strongly countering missiles and torpedoes. Strikecraft are more reliant on shields, missiles and torpedoes are more reliant on armor. Due to their ability to bypass shields, strikecraft are very effective against other strikecraft. And that's probably an important note here, is that strikecraft are a much better deterrent at stopping other strikecraft than using flak batteries in the current build. Flak batteries are still not great. Point defense though, they are now much better given the changes we have had to missiles. I think we'll be covering that in a bit though, so I won't jump into the missile changes right now. They've added armor hardening and shield hardening modifiers, which reduce armor and shield penetration. They've also added new auxiliary components that use exotic gases, rare crystals, living metal or Zro to provide armor and shield hardening. So overall, my thoughts on the armor and shield hardening is that shield hardening is fantastic, armor hardening is a little niche and generally not that effective. There are so many things that can bypass shields. Missiles bypass shields, strikecraft bypass shields. There are lots of other weapons that do this as well, but there are very few weapons that actually bypass armor. We're looking at Praetorian missiles, disruptors, arc emitters, cloud lightning. There's probably one or two others that I'm not thinking of, but that's a very small list compared to the list that bypass shields, given that all of those things that bypass armor generally bypass shields completely as well. Autocannons now have a faster fire rate and thus are very high damage for their weapon size, but have a very short range. They've also added medium and large autocannons, so you can put autocannons on a big battleship and get it to fly in, charge into the fight, and spit out absolutely insane levels of damage. Disruptors and autocannons are now considered brawling weapons with shorter range but faster attacks, and generally speaking, both of these weapons have been rebalanced to have very large amounts of damage output compared to where they were previously. Mining lasers are also now classified as brawling weapons. The refire rate and general stats have been adjusted. With the exception of autocannons, kinetic and missile weapons no longer have bonus hull damage. It's not mentioned here, but I'm pretty sure that kinetic artillery, no, I'm completely confident kinetic artillery still has increased damage to hull as well. Lasers now deal 25% bonus hull damage. This, combined with the fact that they have no minimum range, I think goes part of the way to balance the fact that they have a lower maximum range, so they'll be firing after your regular kinetic weapons. But personally, I don't think that balances out entirely. We'll have to see how it all shakes out when we get into proper ship testing. Plasma weapons now have an increased power consumption, cost, and damage. This is to differentiate them more from other energy weapons. I believe now plasma weapons are getting close to, if not close enough, to be considered equivalent to neutron launchers, except they have a slightly lower range, which is of course still something of a hindrance. Ships now get a limited number of disengagement opportunities. All current drives provide one once the ship takes hull damage below its disengagement threshold, and the hit and run war doctrine grants all of your ships an additional attempt. Civilian ships set to evasive will continue to try to disengage with each hit. Hit and Run provides +2 disengagement opportunities. Admirals now grant their fleet +1 disengage opportunity at levels 5 and 10. The Enigmatic Encoder gives you +1 rather than any evasion. Overall though, this basically means, because we have a hard cap on the number of disengagement opportunities, that low damage weapons are now better at killing ships outright than they were before, because you'll only get a set number of disengage opportunities, so having a lower damage gives a lower disengagement chance. So if there's only 6 disengage opportunities, you want them to only roll 6 low chances rather than hitting them with a high damage weapon and thus letting them roll 6 high chances. Basically, this means that autocannons are much better than they've ever been, and it's a massive upgrade for things like strikecraft as well, in terms of actually being able to kill ships in the late game. Armor components now grant twice as much armor as before, shield components now grant +50% more than before, but regen remains the same. Hull components now grant less than before. Basically, this is a straight up nerf to crystal plating. Armor has been massively increased, and they've also made it so that weapons that are bad against armor are now very good against lots of other types of things, and very good weapons to be choosing overall. In essence, I believe this now means that you want to be running armor most of the time rather than crystal plating, except for some specific matchups, of course. That is a massive and dramatic change compared to previous editions, where I would basically say don't bother running armor, put crystal plating on if you've got it, or nothing. This is all, of course, when you're considering the economic costs of the ships you're putting out. Hull technologies now give 10% hull instead of fixed values. Armor and hull regen now behave like shields, which are 5 times faster outside of combat. Regen values are now 20% of the previous values for most components as well. Missiles now fit into S-slot weapons and have had their damage modified accordingly, but their range has been massively increased. Swarmer missiles go into M, torpedoes and proton neutron launchers are now the only weapons that fit into the G slots. As I've mentioned, they've adjusted the maximum range of all non-torpedo missiles. They've reduced the range of torpedoes, decreased missile accuracy from 100% to 85%, and all of those changes mean that at the start of the game, you probably want to be running missile corvettes and be sitting back with massive range artillery on those early corvettes right at the very start, as long as no one is countering your missiles. Point defense against your missiles would be completely killer if it turns up. If it doesn't, you'll be winning, no questions asked. They've made the extra large weapons more likely to target battleships and titans. They've massively increased the chance to lose or damage ships when a fleet uses FTL to escape a battle. That's emergency FTL. They've reduced the time before emergency FTL can be initiated in combat, so you can't retreat until later on. Ships should now try to spread out a little further away from one another in combat, and I've seen this in game. It makes the battles look much better. Ion cannons now have 3 auxiliary slots: the destroyer, interceptor, the cruiser, gunship, and the battleship broadside stern sections now have an extra auxiliary slot, and they've adjusted power costs for auxiliary slot utilities. It is no longer possible to kill a dragon by distracting it with a large fleet of transport ships. Yes, but unfortunately you can currently kill a dragon by using platforms. Let's not get into that in this video. There's no need to talk about getting 100,000 fleet power in 30 years. Anyway, the cap to the force disparity bonus for fleets that are significantly outnumbered has been dramatically increased, though I would say it's possibly not been increased enough if your goal here is to make very small fleets able to win. I don't think they should be able to win. I'm not entirely convinced force disparity bonus is the best thing to have in the game, but there we are. That wraps up the massive combat rebalance that we've had happen. So basically, yeah, the game is very different now. Fallen Empires are massively terrifying. The endgame crisis is more difficult to defeat than ever before because we don't have neutron launcher spam as a secret weapon up our sleeve to kill them at massive range. And hopefully, usually, we used to kill them before they could even actually fire back at us. Now things are a little bit different. I would say it's a much more interesting time to be playing and fighting fleet combats in Stellaris. Next up, we have all of the new features that have been brought into patch 3.6. But before I cover that, one of the best ways to get your hands on new features for Stellaris is to get new DLC. Until December the 2nd, there is a sale on now at Humble Bundle. If you follow the link down in the description below to the Paradox sale, you can get up to 75% off on the base game and up to 50% off on other DLC. It's not just Stellaris that's on sale here as well, it's everything Paradox related pretty much. So if you want to support this channel, get your hands on some great discounts, and generally have a good time, follow the links down in the description below. So this free patch by the Custodians is bringing reworked ascension paths from Utopia into Tradition trees. They've added a version of Synthetic Ascension Path for machines to Synthetic Dawn. This is much better than the Synthetic Age Ascension perk machine empires used to be able to get their hands on. You basically now can get the synthetic trait on all of your leaders, you can get all of the additional bonuses that come for regular synthetic empires. It's really good. They've added Conclave Federation election type to Federations. That's mainly for the Spiritualist empires, but I believe any empire can take it, or at least any Federation can take it. They've added the Ascensionist Civic to Utopia for regular empires, and equivalents for hives and machines. This provides plus 25% planetary ascension effects, minus 10% ascension cost, and reduces the additional cost of traditions from empire size by 25%. You can actually use this in addition to the Federation, the Spiritualist Federation type, to max out planetary ascension effects over 100%, and in doing so, you can get 0 upkeep alloy jobs on your alloy worlds if you fully ascend those planets. Yes, that's right, you can have alloys being produced with absolutely no mineral requirement, meaning that Faith can grant you ships. The Emperor protects, apparently, ladies and gentlemen, and that is now the reality in Stellaris. The epigenetic triggers technology and genetic resequencing tradition now both allow the removal of pre-sapient traits from species via species modification. The servile trait from the syncretic evolution origin and traits bestowed by the enigmatic cache count as pre-sapient traits for this. They've added various new galaxy shapes such as the 3 and 6 arm spirals and some more experimental and irregular shapes. Galaxies will now default to 2-armed rather than elliptical. Tiny galaxies now support spiral 2-armed galaxies. They've added an archaeology site in a new solar system with a debris belt. They've added support for the text-to-speech in various views containing longer text. That is a massive improvement for anyone that has reading difficulties. And that is a fantastic accessibility feature to have added in, so my hat's off here to Mons and the dev that spearheaded this. They've added the cordyceptic drones civic to necroids for hive minds, allowing them to reanimate all organic space fauna. Yes, and it's totally balanced with absolutely no exploits. They've added an event on game start with Common Ground Origin to let you pick your Federation type. Now that is actually really cool. That means with Common Ground, you can start as anything except a hegemony, and by being able to pick your Federation type, that is really powerful. Let's say you wanted to start as a Trade Empire, you can now start as a member of the Trade Federation. For example, if you want to play a Newt Gunray kind of thing, you could also start, of course, as the regular Common Ground Federation type, which is the regular Galactic Union kind of thing, if you want to be playing some sort of United Federation of Planets style. But because you can choose any Federation type, assuming you have the right ethics or civics, that is really fun. And as ever with a free patch, they've added all new event chains into the game. I must say, I think the Custodians team is pretty much the best thing that's ever happened to Stellaris. We've had better changes and more changes that have helped us than ever before. Not only that, by rolling it out as beta, we've had minimum disruption to our mods than ever before as well. So I hope they do continue to put things out in that way. Speaking of the Custodians, we've got a whole host of new improvements coming with 3.6. They've added Slave Revolt content into the general Separatist revolt situation as a variety when slaves try to revolt. This, I believe, is rather than having it as 2 separate systems, which was pretty confusing to newer players and confusing to returning players, and generally just confusing to everybody when you would have slave revolts being just an event-based system, whereas new planetary revolts use the new situations system. They've added Planet Revolt voiceover to planetary revolt situations. The habitability planet icons in the system view can now be clicked just like on the galaxy map. They've added a planet automation setting which allows for construction even during resource deficits. That I think is really nice, especially for some of the more advanced players if you're wanting to use planetary automation. I know when I was trying to play with it and doing a bit of testing on it, I did find it rather troublesome when I would have an let's say an energy credit deficit or a consumer good deficit, but I knew that I was absolutely fine because I had a glut of them saved up, yet planetary automation would not allow me to construct any new buildings. Now, however, you can do that. Though a big warning should be put on here, if you are a newer player, probably don't click that button because you might end up destroying your economy. So yeah, again, props off, I think, to Monzen for that change. If it's one of the other devs and I've got it wrong, please somebody shout at me if you're a dev, I apologize, but I think thanks again there to Monzen. So they've added a tooltip for detox saying how many toxic terraforming candidates you have within your borders. That's a good thing to know because that now gives you a better idea of whether that perk is worth it. Spoiler alert, generally it's not. Machine name lists now use hexadecimal and zero-based sequential names. That's actually very pleasant. That is a very pleasing change to hear about. Yeah, that's very nice. They've made auto-migration happen via weighted random, so the destination planet will be algorithmically chosen from among the valid destinations, rather than pops always favoring a certain planet until it is full, even when multiples are available. That's That's really good. Wow, they've changed how planet automation is presented in the planet view to more clearly show that there are settings available that the player can use. Yes, I know that until I did my video on planetary automation, people didn't actually realize you could, at that time, right-click on the tooltip and change the settings, which were very important to being able to use the automation tools in any proper way. Planet Automation Crime Management will now forbid enforcer jobs if you have 0 crime and allow enforcer jobs if you have more than 27 crime. That's fantastic, because you really don't want enforcers if you're under 30 crime, because nothing bad can usually happen. The tooltip for planetary automation designation setting now explains when it will create new jobs. They have added a new event image for reanimation related events, and they've added the parasitic overmind government type. That doesn't really make any changes other than flavor, and it's the new government type if you are a necroid hive mind, which is, I think, pretty cool. They've explicitly prevented various scripted solar systems from spawning inside Marauder territory. These include Amor Alvio, Wenkwert, the Caravania capital, and the Lost Colony origin systems. Yeah, any of those spawning inside Marauder territory would be really annoying if you want access to them. They've delayed the start of precursor events for empires with the On the Shoulder of Giants origin. Players who are busy exploring their own backstory may begin exploring those of the broader galaxy after completing the Intercepting History event chain, at which point the precursor events are then 3 times more likely to appear. Okay, I'm not entirely sure if that's a good thing, given that I think by the time you complete that event chain as an On the Shoulder of Giants origin empire, you don't have that many more systems left to survey, so that could completely nerf your ability to finish your precursor chain. Though, of course, if they've tested it and it works, absolutely fine. Habitats built in orbit of large Zro, alloy, or dark matter deposits now also collect those deposits. That's very cool. I kind of wish we could get mining jobs for them on the habitat, so we had like an alloy miner, but maybe that would be overpowered and broken. I just think that would be rather cool. The balance in Stellaris has obviously changed quite a bit. I think we are in a lot of ways getting a more and more balanced game, though of course as new content comes in, sometimes it comes in with a bit of a bang and can be a little overbalanced. Or, I don't know, maybe it's just from the dark side or something. But anyway, what are the balance changes now coming with 3.6? Occupied planets no longer produce or consume resources from buildings or pops. Let me read that one again, because this is a massive change. Occupied planets no longer produce or consume resources from buildings or pops. That means in any wars you're fighting, if you lose a planet, if it's invaded, that's it, that planet is out of the equation for you. That could be fantastic for you in some ways if you're struggling to pay the upkeep on it, but it could also be absolutely terrible if you lose, let's say, one of your Ecumenopolis worlds. That would be very, very bad indeed. They've added nanite autocannons and nanite flak cannons as a reward for killing the scavenger bot. The aquatic trait now costs 2 points. This is, I think, a step in the right direction. I did make a video some time ago outlining why aquatic is so wildly overpowered. I think, to be honest, it should still go up to 3 points. It would still be useful, and I believe people would still take it at 3 points. However, I can see reasons why they wouldn't do that. But 2 points is definitely a step in the right direction, so hats off to the devs for making that balance change. Driven assimilators can now assimilate other machines after taking these synthetic traditions. They've added a robot assembly complex building that gives 2 roboticist jobs. This is unlocked by a new robotic assembly systems technology. This is basically a building that used to be available to just machine empires. Now it's available to all empires, and that's a massive boost. Not for synthetic ascension, because they've actually had a nerf, so this only kind of somewhat goes towards balancing the nerf they've had, but for cybernetic ascension it's a massive boost, and for any unascended empires that want to have robots, it's a great boost as well. The logic engine's traits is now allowed onto your droids. Of course, they can work as researchers, so why not give them researcher boosts? They've tweaked the galactic market location formula to far more strongly favor trade value in its criteria. This is something that's been done again and again to make it stronger and stronger. I've noticed now that it's mainly megacorps and empires with high trade value in the few runs that I've done on 3.6 that get the galactic market, but I'm not sure if it's still strong enough yet. Maybe they need to go even further. because it definitely feels pretty bad and pretty stupid when you see a machine intelligence or a Gestalt consciousness of some kind get their hands on the galactic market. It's like these things don't even have trade, they're not even people, why do they get to have the market? Sorry. Anyway, if a species cannot live on a planet, it is now the first to be purged from it. This closes a clone army exploit related to slowly purging other species instead of the clones, which was, very, very annoying. They've also capped Federation experience at 2,000 above what is required for level 5, so that level 5 Federations with AI are no longer one of the most fragile configurations known to man or alien in the galaxy. Artificers no longer produce engineering research, but that really doesn't take very much away from the Masterful Crafter's Civic. It's still pretty much the best Civic in the game for regular biological empires. They've made the Zro distillation more likely to happen if you have a Shroud Walker teacher. Pearl Divers have had their consumer goods output increased with a corresponding increase in food and or mineral upkeep. Their trade value output has been reduced, and that is not great, but overall, yes, Pearl Divers are slightly better, though the fact that the Civic is locked in forever is still a really, really big problem and a really good reason for why you probably don't want to take it. Splinter Hive holdings now require at least 30 pops present on the subject planet to be constructed, and that's really annoying. That means you can't get that lovely juicy extra pop assembly on your capital from your vassals until they've got 30 pops. This, I assume, is to prevent you from spawning off little mini vassals with only a few pops and then using those to get lots of Splinter Hive holdings and nonsense pop assembly. The Toxic Entity, or Toxic God, now has an acidic gland dealing 1.25% hull damage per day to all ships in the same system. This does not apply to the player-controlled variant. That is very, very annoying. I wish they gave it to the player-controlled variant. That would make the Toxic God really, really good. A large number of tweaks to the ethic assignment weights includes making certain weights based on diplomacy with empires of a particular ethos have an impact that is more dependent on the number of empires you are engaged in such diplomacy with. This should have some big changes to the way your factions are getting happy, grumpy, and the size of them. They fixed some oddities that hampered authoritarianism. For example, now relations with authoritarian empires boost authoritarianism, and if you are authoritarian, it will no longer boost egalitarianism for you to give your pops good living standards. Basically, they should love the fact that the emperor and the authoritarian state is able to provide for them, rather than simply hating the fact that their life is getting better, which I suppose doesn't make much sense. Finally, they've also added some weights based on the job the pop is actively working, i.e. priests, nobles, and soldiers. Certain technologies are no longer cheaper than other technologies in the same tier. They've now balanced the technology costs in the tiers. I think that's mainly a good thing to do. Food processing centers, mineral purification hubs, energy nexuses, alloy plants, all of those things that give us extra bonuses there to our production, well, now they have an increased cost and upkeep on ring worlds, but in exchange, they provide the benefits normally given by their related orbital ring buildings, as well as the benefits they themselves get. So for example, the alloy nanoplant on a ring world will have higher cost and upkeep, but instead of increasing your alloy production by 2 base, it will now increase it by 3 base. That is very useful, and does go some way to improving the Shattered Ring origin. Ringworld and Ecumenopolis planet classes now provide both mechanical and organic pop assembly bonuses. Colony designation on Ringworlds now provide plus 10% pop growth and assembly speed. This can be multiplied through planetary ascension. The default Ringworld designation now provides plus 15%. Those are actually some pretty nice bonuses to get. Ecumenopolises now give plus 25% growth and assembly speed rather than just 50% growth with no assembly. That is though only organic assembly, it's not going to boost your machine assembly. So that is a direct boost to cybernetic and genetically ascended empires and a direct nerf to any psionic or synthetically ascended empires. Efficient Bureaucracy Civic now grants you bureaucrats, priests, managers, and death priests with edict fund production that scales with modifiers to their unity production. Imperialist and Supremacist factions will now be pleased forever if you defeat a Leviathan, not just for 20 years, and that does make a lot of sense. They're also a bit less selective about which Leviathans they're pleased about you killing, i.e. the list has been updated for those added since the Leviathans DLC. Several factions now care about the type of federation you are in, if it is one attached to a particular ethic. So the Spiritualist faction, for example, absolutely love it if you're in the new Spiritualist Federation type. The Imperialist faction will now care about how much of your fleet power you are using, and factions will now disband and no longer reform if they can command the support of less than 3% of the electorate. That should hopefully solve the annoying issue that we've had with notification spam, where we would constantly get a faction destroying or disbanding themselves and then reforming, even though they didn't really have enough weight to survive and could then disband again and again and again. So that's a very nice change to have included. For some reason, I have absolutely no idea why, I promise, but they have hit culture workers with the nerf stick. They've halved the culture worker modifiers for egalitarians, xenophobes, and xenophiles, and they've doubled the culture worker modifier for pacifists. They've increased the time it takes to do first contact with other civilizations by about 30%. That should increase how long it feels we're in kind of the exploration phase of the game, and I like that change. It is now allowed for the galaxy to contain multiple Void Dweller empires. Finally, at the moment the AI was locked to only having a single AI Void Dweller. With this change, we'll hopefully see more. They've moved the repeatable technologies for Strikecraft into society military theory. They've reduced the governing ethics attraction of newly conquered pops, so they should prevent something more of a challenge to your empire if they have divergent ethics. They've removed the defense platform cost and upkeep reductions from bulwarks because it was quite overpowered, and bulwarks now gain inherent shield and armor hardening as they level up. That's definitely a nerf to bulwarks, who used to be able to get down to zero cost defense platforms. I wonder how the devs found out about that little exploit, but now they will no longer be able to do so, though they'll still get all of the great benefits you get for defense platform damage, hull points, that sort of thing. Strategic resource planetary automation will no longer fill fortress designation planets with refineries instead of strongholds, thank goodness. Subjects that are not disloyal will now gain ethics attraction corresponding to their overlord's ethics. This was already the case for spiritualism, now it is the case for all ethics. That is a fantastic change, because what we want to see is our subjects becoming ethically aligned with us as the game goes on. The Cybrex and Sentinel factions now scale to a limited degree based on the setting for endgame Crisis difficulty. Their difficulty is the square root of Crisis difficulty. This means they're going to be very effective at 1 times, somewhat effective at 5 times, and still completely useless at 25 times and beyond, which I think is good. If you're playing at the higher difficulty levels, you want the Cybrex and Sentinel factions not to do most of the work for you. Martial law, hunter-killer drones, and compliance drones planet modifiers now provide penalties to both mechanical and organic pop assembly, which is a good balance change to include. Zro distillation technology no longer explicitly requires psionic theory, but is extremely rare without it. They have buffed the demonic invasion by giving them additional naval capacity. They've reduced ship upkeep and many more fleets, scaling off of their naval cap. That means if you get the demonic invasion or demonic incursion, which can happen and can be quite interesting, this will now be more powerful and more of a threat to you as a player. They've updated the mercenary and salva station designs due to changes in which weapons could fit in which slots. Extra-dimensional anchors and portals now have shield hardening auras for allies in that system, and that is going to mean that the bypass weaponry is less effective against the unbidden than ever before. Large extra-dimensional ships and structures now have a point defense solution. That is going to help out if you're just trying to kill them with missiles. These special endgame Crisis factions such as Aberrant, Cybrex, and Sentinels now show up a bit earlier during the endgame Crisis on the larger galaxy maps. Pre-sapient traits now have no trait point or trait pick cost. Of course, the Ascension paths have had some changes. The assimilation tooltip now states if they will remove psionic or cybernetic traits, because when you assimilate into being psionic or cybernetic, you will remove psionic or cybernetic if that is a trait that is opposite to the one you're assimilating into, and they have it, meaning you will find it much more difficult to get psionic cybernetic pops that have both. You can now psionically awaken cyborgs. Doing so will remove any cybernetic implants they have. Installing cybernetic implants in a psionic species now prevents them from having any psionic abilities, as I've basically just gone through. The non-hive mind cybernetically ascended empires can now remove the hive-minded trait from hive-minded cyborg pops via assimilation. That is really, really good, giving you conquest options as a cybernetic empire to conquer not just other bio pops and other biological empires, but now also hive mind empires too. The budding trait is no longer mutually exclusive with the vat-grown trait. That means we can now stack that budding pop assembly with the late game genetic ascension trait vat-grown for the extra 25%, which is really quite nice. On top of that, of course, we're also going to be getting extra pop assembly from our clone vat, so you can get some crazy pop assembly now with genetic ascension. The polymelic trait that you can get from Leviathans is now mutually exclusive with all versions of the budding trait, which is good because that's basically a better version of budding. They've rebalanced the cyborg, erudite, psychic, and synthetic leader traits. However, from my opinion, psychic is now hands down the best trait to have across your leaders. It gives you the most additional research, it gives you extra abilities on your scientists, it's one of the better ones for admirals, although admittedly cyborg is the best for admirals, granting not just plus 10% damage or plus 10% fire rate, but both 10% damage and 10% fire rate increases. There have also been a whole host of changes to AI opinions and the way they are calculated. There is a dramatic increase to the absolute value of most opinion modifiers in the game. They've increased the opinion modifiers granted from first contact, decreased the base rate at which they decay, and made the decay rate modified by improving or harming relations. So your first contact should have more of an impact on your future relations with the AI empires that you meet in the game. They've made it so the AI will absolutely hate it now, or hate it a lot more, if you undertake Become the Crisis for obvious reasons. The maximum opinion from Improved Relations has been increased from 100 to 150, and the minimum opinion from Harm Relations has been decreased from 100 to minus 150. The opinion modifiers from Espionage Operations now have their decay rate affected by improving and harming relations as well. The same is true for opinion modifiers from Galactic Imperium reactions. They've refactored the opinion modifiers from the Galactic Imperium, and that should have more of an impact now on whether or not the Civil War fires, I believe. They've also got only xenophobes that are now happy if the Caravaneers are destroyed. Xenophile, pacifist, and corporates will be very, very upset if the Caravaneers are destroyed specifically by you, so probably don't do that. When it comes to traditions, they've rebalanced harmony, prosperity, mercantile, versatility, synchronicity, and adaptability. Prosperity is still pretty much as good as ever, harmony has been improved quite a bit, mercantile is roughly the same, versatility is a little better, synchronicity and adaptability off the top of my head here I think are a little worse, but generally speaking, the changes are minor balance tweaks overall. Mechanist Origin now provides plus 15% robot assembly speed and plus 1 robot trait pick as an Origin modifier instead of minus 5% robot upkeep. That does make it somewhat more powerful and a better pick if you're thinking about going down the synthetic or cybernetic paths later in the game, rather than the previous version which simply gave you more robot technologies from the start. Finally, they now have robo-modding as a guaranteed research option from the start of the game, and your robots will start with bulky and high maintenance traits and the matching trait for whichever worker job they hold, so you'll start with agrarian robots and also robots that are better at getting minerals too. You've probably heard, but the Shattered Ring Origin has been massively improved. The number of segments that are now colonizable on the game start depends on their guaranteed habitable world setting. Yes, they'll start at 0% habitability, but they'll have a bunch of blockers on them, which will increase the habitability at 25% each time if you unlock them and remove those blockers. The blockers are locked behind certain early game technologies, but they're relatively easy to get. Repairing these Shattered Ringworld segments now qualifies you for the Galactic Wonders Ascension perk. The cost and time to restore the Shattered Ringworld segment has also been reduced by 25%. Finally, in balance, the corpse-filled blockers now take a whole year to clear. The Custodian team have once again looked at the AI and improved the AI in our game. The AI has been getting consistently stronger and better at playing Stellaris since the Custodian team started around patch 3.0, or possibly it was patch 3.1. This now makes them more effective than ever at killing players. The AI will now value you offering them fleets. This fixes several cases where you would cheese the AI with worthless offers, i.e. fleets that you could have just disbanded, or fleets that have no FTL drives, or a 100% of your total fleet, despite just being a single ship. They've added base unity targets for machine empires so they can afford more leaders in the early game. AI assault transports will now go ahead and invade planets if they have enough strength, even if they have additional reinforcements on the way, meaning the AI should attack earlier and faster and get through your space faster than ever. The AI will no longer assign excessive amounts of fleets to bombard the same planet. The AI will no longer get stuck trying to activate tradition trees if it was blocked out from activating them, like the Ascension perk trees. This previously mainly affected modded games, so this is an improvement if you like to play Stellaris with mods that affect tradition trees in some way. The AI will now build armies based on the size of their economy. They will now correctly avoid superior enemy forces when pathing to link up with their fleet group. This should mean you can't kill the AI as easily with piecemeal tactics. You'll have to hit them where they are strong because they won't move their fleets to just die aimlessly in your systems. They will also use wartime edicts, making their fleets stronger than ever before. They will pay for their strategic resources from their stockpile without constructing additional rare resource producing buildings. I hope that does mean though that they don't end up going into deficits with these rare resources, because that would be a little bit stupid for them to do that. The AIs lacking rare resources will no longer create ship designs that rely on them, and thus lock them out from building certain ships. They have fixed an issue where the Praetorian Scourge did not run all of its AI code, sometimes making it less effective. Yes, there were times that Praetorian could bug out and basically simply stop attacking once they'd killed enough things in the galaxy, which wasn't so fun as a player if you're trying to survive, or at least trying to die by endgame crisis. Death by endgame crisis is probably one of my favorite methods of suicide in Stellaris. They fixed an issue where the AI would sometimes build strongholds even though their economy plan for Navy Cap was not activated. They've made the AI generally want more battleships, even though battleships now aren't as good as they used to be, and generally varied the AI's desire for a certain distribution of ship sizes between the personalities. They've made strategic AI take friendly following fleets into account when computing the fleet power, meaning that if there are friendly following fleets, they will view the power of that system or the fleets in that system as higher than previously. Empires will now support crisis declarations against empires that they're at war with. That means there is more galactic politicking that you can do as a player than ever before, and I am definitely in favor of that change. They fixed issues with AI difficulty adjusted economic modifiers and certain misevaluation of modifier benefits in its economic strategy. Overall, these changes to the AI aren't as sweeping or as improving as some of the changes we've seen, for instance, in patch 3.4 and 3.3, but we're still getting better and better, which is really good to see. As someone who I think actually mainly plays Stellaris in single player, I am always a fan of AI improvement. It gives more challenge, more enjoyment, and more replayability from this fantastic title. Stability and performance of the game have of course been improved as ever. Crikey, we're now over 48 minutes through, or at least we've just made it to 48 minutes. This has been quite a long patch notes. As you can see, we've got a whole host of changes, but if you've made it this far through the patch notes, this far through this video, and you're still listening, welcome to the Secret Callout. Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you're actually watching and paying attention all the way through this late point in the video. But anyway, what has changed with stability? Well, they fixed an out of sync involving branch office power production, they fixed a crash when ascending planets, and eliminated potential out of sync due to diplomatic relations. In terms of performance, they fixed lag from having a combination of a large number of species and a large number of colonizable planets. That should help you later on in the game. They've made it so that opening the fleet manager in the late game will now have a much reduced impact on frame rate. They've reduced the UI frame rate lag from several sources, notably related to fleets and calculations of whether and where any reinforcements can be recruited. They further improved the performance of using triggered economic category modifiers. They've made it so that mean time to happen events will fire early, or they'll be removed early on if they have fire only once and have already fired, i.e. they will stop draining performance once no longer relevant. That's probably a nice change to include. They've slightly sped up the calculation of pop job weights when updating from the serial, i.e. not during the monthly batch parallel update. They've added caching to AI fleet power calculations as well, meaning the game doesn't have to constantly add up the fleet power of the AI. Last but by absolutely no means least, we have the UI changes that are coming with 3.6. These are all basically quality of life improvements that should make your experience and interaction with the game better than it used to be. They've added terraforming candidate icons to the galaxy map and system view so you can more easily see when there are terraforming candidates available to you in the galaxy. They've reduced notification spam from empires having certain casus bellis against you, or casus belli. That is going to help you when the changes come, I assume, from having, a few empires or the entire galaxy say, hey, we can declare a vassalization war against you and a tributary war. There's lots of them. Spam, bam, bam, bam. And that kind of fluctuates up and down all the time if you move between certain power levels. I'm hoping that's the reduction they're talking about. Selecting fleets from the galaxy map will now no longer select fleets merging with larger ones. Oh my goodness me, that's so good. This permits selecting all fleets in a system without disrupting any fleets that are on their way to merge with them. Caravaneers now tell you when you'll be allowed to open another reliquary in the tooltip, where they say they can't offer one right now as they need more time to prepare. They've added planetary designations to the drop-down list for selecting planets in the resettlement view, and generally all made it look much, much nicer. And that's going to make it much, much easier to move pops around between your planets, knowing which planets are which and not having to constantly, memorize the name of a specific planet you want to move them to, and then open all the menus up and go, darn it, did I get the right name or not? Because that was definitely a problem I used to have. Tooltips regarding offering or receiving Federation Association status now explain that this is basically a non-aggression pact that's going to be helpful for newer players. They've added a more helpful tooltip to the interdimensional trade modifiers. The technology card UI will now resize dynamically on the size of the content in the card. Interesting. They fixed selected technology card scroll bar overlapping the unlocked content icons. They fixed the mouse shortcut tooltip for pausing the game being displayed in multiplayer, even though it cannot be used in multiplayer. They've added a tooltip for War Demand Achievement Acceptance that lists systems you lack claims on. They've added information on potential branch offices for Megacorps to the Kick from Federation Diplo Actions tooltip, since commercial pacts between Federation members are not a thing. They've added a terraforming candidate filter to the expansion planner view. First contact event chains will now progress if there is a purely random event with only one option. Note that this only covers events between stages, not the ones that end stages, which may also only have one option. You can tell if your first contact chain is not blocked by a pending event by the alert looking less urgent. And yeah, that can sometimes happen. When you're going through first contact, if you don't click the proceed button, you can end up being stuck for quite a while. Fix the tooltip for commercial packs showing the wrong value for how much you would benefit in terms of trade income. They've also fixed it being possible for subjects to press the build holdings button in the agreements view, which they should not be able to do. They've added modifier details to production and upkeep of building tooltips, and they've added modifier details to production and upkeep of district tooltips. There are also a whole host of bug fixes and a whole host of modding changes that have been added to 3.6. I'm not going to do that because otherwise this video will stretch on long past 1 hour, which is, that's very long. That's too long. I don't think we can do that. I have my day, you have your lives. Let's continue with them. If it's very important for you to read those though, I will of course put the link down to this patch notes in the description of the video so you can go and check it out there. But otherwise, patch 3.6 is out, you can now have a go with it. If you would like to know more about one of the most overpowered builds that has now been included and enabled by patch 3.6, yes, that's right, I'm talking about getting 100,000 fleet power in the first 30 years, click the video on screen now.